often do you get to bring what makes you uniquely you to your work? Whether it's your personality, your strengths, or your interests, how well do others appreciate and value you for who you are? Too often, we try to prove ourselves through our skills and accomplishments, but that rarely feels like enough. So we're left with imposter syndrome, frustration, and a general lack of fulfillment in our careers. This week, I talk with Anthony Kuo, a career satisfaction coach who shares strategies we can all use to thrive at work. Anthony shares his personal journey of feeling pressured to do things he was good at, even though he didn't enjoy them. He also teaches us how to spot not just the red flags, but also the green flags to help us better understand what we need in order to be our best selves at work. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Menninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Anthony. I am already enjoying our conversation, the one we started before I hit record, and I can't wait to continue it. I'd love to start by inviting you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Anthony Kuo. I'm a career satisfaction coach. And so what that means, I like to say, is that I help people become what they want to be when they grow up. And we do that through 3 steps. First, by defining what career satisfaction even means to you in the first place, because that is actually a really, really personal thing. And it doesn't serve us to go by like your parents' definition or society's definition or what your second grade teacher said was career satisfaction. So once we figure that out, the second step is where can you find that? So we determine where that is possible, where you can achieve that. And then third, once you do that, we work to make that a reality. And sometimes that means, the whole rabbit hole of resumes and interviewing and all that typical stuff. But then sometimes also it's as simple as having an uncomfortable conversation at your current job and advocating for what you need and then being pleasantly surprised that it's actually available.
I love that because you're right. I think a lot of times we jump to the conclusion that something isn't possible before we've actually explored it or asked for it. And I remember years ago, my old boss always used to say, I can't solve a problem I don't know exists. And, and I think that it's a fair statement. If you haven't asked your manager, you haven't, sort of advocated for yourself, you don't know what's possible. Yeah. And I want to go back to what you talked about in terms of career satisfaction too, because I think that's so important. What you mentioned about not what your parents think or your second grade teacher. I think many of us are carrying around a narrative that was fed by these influencers in our lives, and we don't even realize it. And then we're acting out those beliefs and wondering why we don't feel as satisfied as we think we should, right? There's this sense of, is this all there is? Is this really what my career is going to look like? And so I wonder if you can say more about just this whole experience that so many of us are having.
Thank you. Yeah, it really is, in my experience, a pretty universal experience that what you just said, is this all there is? I've spoken to so many people who climb and reach the pinnacle of their careers and become an executive somewhere or start the business that they thought they wanted to. And then they get there and it's like, what the hell? Is this it? I thought there would be more. I thought I'd be happier here. And I think that this is I certainly had that experience in my own corporate career. I was a rising star. I was rapidly promoted. I had all the markers of quote unquote success. I was the poster child of the American dream. You know, my parents were immigrants to this country. I did the whole thing where I got good grades, I went to a good school, I got a good prestigious job, I had the six-figure salary, the house, the car, everything. Um, and I reached a point where I was just like, I don't understand what's happening because everything on the outside sh is telling me that I should be happy, but on the inside, I just felt empty. And all I could do was just collapse on the couch when I got home. And what I started to realize was that I was following, yes, my parents' template for what success meant, but also I was doing so in a way that I think everyone does because this is what we're conditioned to do. I was following what I was good at. I was following my skills as opposed to what I was actually interested in. Um, that's something that you're totally right. We are so conditioned to do from when we're very young. That's what we get praised for when we're in school. When you do well on a test. Oh, what a smart kid, right? Um, and this is a very personal journey for me. Because I was raised by two very accomplished musicians. My parents met in music school. They went to Juilliard, and I was taught the piano from a very young age. And I ended up performing at Carnegie Hall when I was 15 and again when I was 17. Um, and again, that's one of those things that sounds really impressive, right? Um, and to be fair, there was a certain amount of hard work and talent that went into it, but it was not my thing. It was 100% my mom's thing. Uh, and I went along with it only as far as it was useful to me in that it helped me get scholarships from college, but my heart wasn't in it. And it was really, again, really baffling for me to be so good at something but not enjoy it. And so this idea, this experience leads to the backbone of what I teach, which is that there's a really big difference between what we're good at and what we enjoy. So much of our uh, the job market narrative is about what can I do for you, right? Or what can you do for me? What are your skills? What's your experience? And the question I think that gets lost, but is extremely important, is, but what do I need to thrive?
Mm. Oh, that is such a powerful question. And I wonder, you talk about your own experience, which I so appreciate. And I wonder if there was a moment. Was there an aha moment? Was it more of a gradual realization? How did you get to a point where you were able to see this with the kind of clarity that you describe it now? Because I think that it's so interesting. It's when we talk about it at this sort of intellectual level, right? It makes so much sense that there's a difference between your skills and interests, but I don't think that we've internalized that clearly. And so, how did you get there?
Years of therapy, for one. It was a gradual realization for me. Um, and it was one of those things where I had as much awareness as I possibly could have at any given moment, and I made the best moves that I could at the time. So what that looked like for me was a series of smaller jumps in my career where I I would go through this like roller coaster cycle where I had a one-ish year of honeymoon in a new job. I would, hey, this fixes everything. And then slowly the momentum would go down and I'd start feeling like I was dragging my feet into work and those Sunday scaries would fire up like I don't want to go in. What is the point of all of this? And then I'd figure out what was wrong to the best of my ability. And at first it was very like professional performance related, like, oh, I'm not being given enough opportunities here, or I'm getting bored, or I want more social interaction. and I would make a change. Sometimes that change would be an internal transfer within the company I was working at, and sometimes you know, I would execute a transition to another company or an adjacent field. Um, and there came a point where I realized that I exhausted all of my options within the realm of traditional employment, where I just real like I felt like what I was doing was rearranging deck furniture on the Titanic. The ship was going down no matter how pretty I made it, you know. And that's when I started to question things at a deeper level. And so there was a gradual build up to this, but there was actually a moment where I realized, oh, this whole corporate career, picture perfect performance, white picket fence thing is not cutting it for me. And it actually had nothing at all to do with work. I got into a car accident.
Hmm.
I was on my way home from work, and I was picking up a few beers to brainstorm a new fledgling business idea that I was having that turned into what I'm doing now. And I was meeting with my buddy who is a graphic designer, and we're gonna start noodling on some basic branding concepts. And as I was pulling out of the parking lot, I wasn't really paying attention, and I had a little fender bender, just a little tap.
Hmm.
Um, But the whole thing got blown so out of proportion where like the police got involved and like lawyers got involved, and it was just like completely out of proportion to what it actually was. And the whole thing was so infuriating, not only because of the like, you know, having the book thrown at me for no good reason, but because of what it represented to me. I was reverse commuting from New York City to New Jersey at the time, and it was eating up 3 hours of my day every day. Uh, and the car became a symbol for everything that was wrong in my life. And then the car expanded to, well, why do I need the car? Because I'm commuting to this job that I have tried desperately to fix over the last 7 years, and it just isn't working. And that little fender bender, like it was such a pain to deal with. But I'm so grateful that it happened because that was the wake up call for me that like things need to be changed at a fundamental level.
I love the symbolism there. Like that could be a movie, right? Like, and it is so interesting that it often takes some kind of catalyzing event, right, to bring it into focus in a clearer way. And I think as I'm listening to you talk too, what jumps out at me is that many of us have, for whatever reason, this belief that it's either or, right? And I think it's maybe the starving artist kind of
Hmm.
mentality that we were raised with of either you have a really good, successful career that leverages your strengths, or you compromise your compensation to follow your interests, right? It's
Hmm.
like I talk to people all the time who are like, "Oh, well, I'd love to work for a nonprofit, but I can't afford to." Right? It's like they're acknowledging that they are sacrificing something that's meaningful or purposeful because they can't find something that's at the intersection of both their interests and their strengths, right? So,
Hmm.
so how do we grapple with that sort of conscious or unconscious belief to get to a place where we're not trapped by our strengths?
Yeah, I love this question because it really gets to the heart of career satisfaction for me. And I said earlier that career satisfaction is something you have to define for yourself because it is extremely personal. I'll share my definition of career satisfaction, and I think it's one that like does like aspects of it do apply to everyone. Um, I define career satisfaction as when you get to use your personality at work. where you are in an environment that values and appreciates who you are innately. So you don't have to uh, twist yourself into a pretzel in order to succeed or in order to be recognized or valued. And I think what ends up happening uh, a lot, and I imagine this dovetails a lot with imposter syndrome, is we try to belong uh, through our skills. We try to belong through our achievements. And if I can just achieve high enough, then I'll have a place here. And if, that works fine, sort of, right? It's a helpful strategy for, the like beginning parts of life and beginning parts of career, especially in certain circumstances. Um, but it comes at a trade-off, right? Where what happens if you don't? What happens if you struggle? What happens if there's a learning curve? Then, oh my goodness, I'm a fraud. I don't belong here, right? All those inner voices that I'm sure we're all very familiar with. And so that leads to a very heavy focus on what am I good at? Um, you know, I teach a concept that I call the care card. And it's like when you go to the store and buy a plant, there's a little card that says like this is how much water to give this plant. This is how much light to give it. You don't want to give too much light because you'll burn the leaves, and you don't want to give too little light because then it'll turn white and starve and all that. Learned all of this the hard way, by the way, by killing my mom's plants when I was 13. Um, and so what if we could have that for ourselves as humans, for our careers? And I discovered that one of the really key components to our care card is not just interest, is not just skills, but style. What is our style of meeting our interests? What is our style of applying our skills? What is our style of meeting our needs? And when we have it met, it's really effortless. You just show up and you're you, and it feels great. And when your style isn't met through your work or through your workplace, then you end up feeling like a square peg in a round hole. And it doesn't matter how much you try and how good you get and how accomplished you become, there's still something that just doesn't fit.
Mm.
So we work with all of that.
That is such a great way to capture that. I'm going back to what you were saying earlier too about trying to belong through your skills and achievements, because just the pressure just keeps ratcheting up, right? And especially if
Mhm.
you work in a highly competitive environment or you are constantly comparing yourself to other people, you never reach the point of, okay, I've done it. I'm here.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so there's that constant source of self-doubt, imposter syndrome, however we want to think about it. And really, it is a function of I'm not able to be who I am. And I think about this a lot too, because I had a high tech career before I started doing the work that I do today. And I was a pretty intelligent person. I did well in school. I did well, I was a non technical person in a technical environment, which always created a lot of self doubt for me. But even when I was at my peak, even when I felt like I know what I'm doing, there was always something missing. And I never could put my finger on it. And I think it was because it wasn't me. I felt like I was like, sort of playing a role. It wasn't how I would choose to show up and the things I would choose to do if I had that another option. And so, I look at myself today in comparison to then, and I guess you could call some of it maturity, but a lot of it is like I feel liberated in a sense because I get to do the things that I love to do every day. And I get to, focus, even though I work harder today, I feel more challenged today than ever before. doing it in a way that allows me to, like you said, thrive, right? And I think there are unfortunately so many people out there who just don't see that as a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, it is really ingrained in our culture to not see it as a possibility, to always be on this endless treadmill of there's the next thing to accomplish in order for you to feel worthy. And then once you get there, there's the next thing. Oh, you didn't see it before because you weren't worthy, but then there's the next thing. And I think it comes from, like I was a academically gifted child. And I was in all the like quote unquote gifted programs, which is a double-edged sword. I had great learning opportunities as a kid. I loved learning. I still do. And it also meant that all of the adults around me, like all of the feedback I was getting from the adults around me was for my smarts and for my achievements rather than for who I was. And I mean, I did get some of that too, like, you're a good kid,
Mm.
but it meant that I internalized that. And and what I said earlier, like what happens when I was confronted with something that was challenging? What happened when I was learning? Like failure is an integral part of learning. How else do you learn than through your mistakes? And I started to notice for myself, like I have the vocabulary now as an adult with a lot of perspective, but I remember the feeling of like the path narrowing for how much leeway I had to experiment, to try things. Um, and and after a while, like by the time I was in middle school, I felt like I didn't really have a choice but to be the perfect A plus student. And it would cause all sorts of anxiety if I would get like a 95 on a test, which is a really good score. Um, it's still an A. It definitely demonstrates that I learned something and retained something. Um, and it still felt like it wasn't good enough. And I think a lot of us carry that forward into adulthood where you get the promotion, but then, our corporate overlords structure things so that you get the promotion, but then here's even more objectives. Here's more quote unquote opportunities for improvement, right? And it just induces this feeling of I'm not good enough and I don't have what it takes to do what I'm doing. Forget about I don't have what it takes to do anything else. I don't have enough to just do what I'm doing. I'm barely hanging on as it is.
Hmm.
And that I think leads people to feeling really, really trapped. And a big part of what my work entails when I sit with people is just to restore their hope and faith in themselves. And a lot of that comes through simply reminding them of what they're capable of. Because a lot of the messaging that they've internalized is, you're no good.
Yeah.
And if you've gotten anywhere in your career, you've done something valuable. If you've gotten anywhere in your career, you've done something that is worthy of recognition. And the unfortunate thing that happens is when it doesn't get recognized, we forget about it, or it goes and sits in the blind spot. And so, a really big part of the recovery and the advancement into career satisfaction is to not only identify it, but to embrace it so that it can be yours.
Mm. Wow, there's so much to what you just said. I'm trying to figure out which bite to take. Because I want to go back just for a moment to what you were describing about the 95 on the test. Because I just wrote an article about this, and one of my points was that the way that school is structured creates perfectionism very
Mhm.
early on because we're all graded on that standard of perfection. And if you are a good student and everybody's praising you for being a good student, the incentive is there to just be perfect
Mhm.
and always get the A plus. And then we get into the workplace. There's no such thing as an A plus anymore, right? You can't get 100 on your tests. You don't even get generally speaking, the feedback to know where you are in the process. And
Mhm.
it's very disorienting for those high achievers who have become accustomed to that, right? And so if you have no internal sense of what is important to you or how you evaluate yourself and your worth and your value as you're describing, all you have to go on is the external feedback and validation of the people around
Yeah.
you, right? And then that becomes a trap because, like you said, now I'm making my world smaller and smaller and smaller because I can't take the risks required to expand.
Mhm.
And so much of life is trial and error, right? We learn about ourselves through experimenting, through failure, getting it wrong, making mistakes, figuring things out. And if we don't give ourselves permission to do that, we end up in this little small bubble that doesn't serve us or anyone around us.
Mhm. You just said something so important about like developing your own internal barometer for your value and for your worth. And that is so important. And that's why it's like the first step in in my work, right? Like define what career satisfaction means to you. And it sounds simple when I say it, but it is a really long and deep process for a lot of people because we've gone so long without even giving it any thought. Um, and we've become so accustomed to just hanging on to the external indicators that somebody else gave to us a long time ago. You're making me think of an incident in my eighth grade science class. um, where like I was definitely like a like perfectionist student, but there was one girl in my class who was even more so. Uh, and like, and I don't blame her for it because her mom was really scary about it. Like, if she got a 99 on a test, she would like start crying and beg for the extra point just so she wouldn't catch crap from her mom. And the experiment of the week was the egg drop. You remember, like, you would package up an egg in whatever you could think of, and then our teacher would go to the top of the roof and toss it down. And if your egg stayed intact, you passed. And if your egg broke, you failed. Um, I think the grading scheme of that is problematic in hindsight, but this poor girl, she worked really hard on her on her um on her project, and the laws of physics won out on that one. And when we opened her package, the egg had broken, and she just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed, and eventually the teacher felt bad and gave her like a C for it instead of a zero. Um, and I just think now about how tragic that is because, in fact, she really did learn something. Like we all did. We all learned about what protects an egg when you
Mm-hmm.
throw it off a roof. And that's really useful, especially if you want to become like an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we also learned what doesn't work. Also really important if you want to be an engineer or just in general. And it's really unfortunate that the lesson that day that almost all of us learned was, wow, I got a zero.
Mm-hmm.
Or wow, I got an A. And we didn't really understand, you know, we learned a little science that day, but I think we learned more about like the system.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really powerful story because my sense as you're describing that, especially if most people got the zero, is that the A was more of a phew, right? Than a sense of, oh, I learned something and I got this right, right? It was more like, oh, thank God I escaped the the
Mhm.
horrors of and And you're right. I think there's so many moments like that where our highest priority is to protect ourselves from
Yeah.
some perceived negative consequence, as opposed to saying, what can I learn from this? How will this
Hmm.
enlighten or enrich me in some way?
Yeah. And that's the thing with career satisfaction, because I like to say that career satisfaction is not a one and done. It's not like you land in a job and then you can wipe your hands clean of the whole journey and cool, that's it. That's it forever. Um, because it's not going to be perfect. It never is. When we land in a new career, something's going to be better. But then because we because landing in that new career and that better career gives us the space to enjoy more, then we start to have the availability to notice, oh, that other part of my career that I haven't had the bandwidth to notice before, that's not quite right anymore. And I don't love that. And if we have the like rigid, did I pass or did I fail kind of mentality, it's going to feel like a failure. It's going to feel like, oh no, I jumped out of the frying pan into the fire. But we can take it and learn from it. We can we can work with it. Um, and so sometimes when I work with people, it's a one in like it's a short-term engagement, see each other for a few months, and then, I wish them well in their new chapter. And then some people I work with long term because it's a it's a whole adventure to notice what would you like now? What would you like now that you've landed here? What would you like to experiment with? Oh, cool. We had a hypothesis that that would be better, and that turned out not to be the case. Cool. What did we miss so we can do better next time?
Mm, I love the language of hypothesis too, because that takes some of the personal emotion out of it, right? And it sort of acknowledges that, yeah, we're doing a bit of an experiment here, and we're testing. Like I like to think of a lot of the career management process as collecting data,
Mhm.
right? And there's nothing inherently good or bad about it. It's just I'm learning and about myself. I'm learning about what's out there. So I think
Mhm.
that's a really great way to think about it. Uh, so, I mean, it sounds like if we think about it in terms of your process, step one is the redefinition or the clearer definition of career satisfaction. Would you agree with that?
Yep, 100%.
So, would you advise people listening to take that as an action for themselves? Is there anything else that you would suggest? Like, obviously, we're going to, in a moment, get to how people can find you if they want you as their partner in the process. But if they're going to try this on their own, is there anything else that you would say they should be thinking about? Kind of, if they've never thought about this before and they're just thinking, "Ooh, this speaks to me. What do I do next?"
Yeah, I think the first thing that I advise people to do is to actually, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, but it's to listen to your dissatisfaction, because that is really important information that you're getting from yourself, um, where your body, your system is trying to tell you something. Something's not working. And we can often define what would work through what doesn't work, right? So from a broad philosophical sense of define career satisfaction as it means to you, like that's nice. That's interesting. But the real practical nature of that is what are the green flags and the red flags that you need to see? Like what specifically makes you feel like you're thriving? What specifically makes you feel like you're just gonna, rage quit the next day? And so that's uh, that transition into the practical, using your day-to-day experience as information to feed into your next day-to-day experience is where the rubber meets the road on this whole satisfaction journey.
I think you're absolutely right. It takes it down to a much more practical level than that very abstract question of what does career satisfaction mean to
Yeah.
me?
Yeah. I get a lot of referrals from therapists, actually.
Mm,
And it's a really great partnership because in therapy, you work through the emotional things and you do go through like some of that exploration of like, what does my career even mean to me as a person?
mhm.
Um, and where therapists tend to turn to me is for that practical, like, this is what it specifically looks like for you in your job.
Mm. So for anyone out there who's listening and wants to learn more about that and you, where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and all the things. My handle is Untamed Career, and my website is untamedcareer.com. And I also, we were talking about this earlier. I was thinking about what would be a nice resource for listeners of this podcast. Like, what is the intersect between career satisfaction and imposter syndrome? And we discovered as we were chatting before recording that there's a lot. um, one of the things that we chatted about today was like feeling stuck, right? Feeling stuck in what you're doing. And a really common thing that I hear when people walk into my office is, I feel like I can't do anything more than what I'm currently doing. And I'm afraid that if I move to something else, I'll have to start all over at the bottom. And like, I've worked so hard to get to where I am. I don't want to get coffee anymore. Um, and if you've, like I said earlier, like if you've gotten anywhere in your career, you've done a lot of stuff. You've gotten a lot of valuable experience. You have a lot of knowledge, even if it's really specific. There is a really strong base of transferable skills and transferable knowledge that you're building. So I've put together a guide to help you consider the transferable skills you might be missing when you ask yourself that question. So if you have that feeling of, I can't do what I'm doing, I can't do anything other than what I'm doing, we'll leave a link to where you can get this guide in the show notes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anthony. I loved this conversation. I'm sure others will as well. So appreciate your insights and just very grateful for your willingness to be part of this with me.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate your curiosity and your message. It's so needed, and I also really love your ethos of like allowing the imperfect to be. As a recovering perfectionist and people pleaser myself, we really need that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.